Hi, I'm Rick Reynolds, founder and president of Affair Recovery. And today I want to talk about another potential antidote to shame/pride. Nancy D. Lamas, in her book Brokenness, has a list comparing pride versus brokenness, because I think brokenness is a key concept when it comes to dealing with pride. But pride and shame, as we've talked about before, are really the same thing. It's always about my image and what others are thinking of me. Between pride and shame, you just change the valence from positive to negative. I hope looking at the concept of brokenness potentially gives you another way of looking at this issue of pride/shame. You see, pride and shame, they focus on the failure of others. But brokenness is overwhelmed with a sense of their own spiritual need. With pride and shame, there's a critical fault-finding spirit. You look at everybody else's faults with a microscope, but try to minimize yours by looking through a telescope. But brokenness is compassionate, and it can actually forgive much because you know how much you've been forgiven. Pride and shame, there's a lot of self-righteousness and potentially looking down on other people. I mean, self-contempt is actually one of the primary ways we deal with shame. But with brokenness, we esteem all others as even better than us. Pride and shame have this independent, self-sufficient spirit, thinking they should be able to do it. While with brokenness, there's a dependent spirit, and you recognize your need for others. Pride and shame have to prove that they're right. But brokenness is willing to yield the right to be right. With pride and shame, you have to claim your rights. And there's a demanding spirit. But brokenness is willing to yield rights and has a meek spirit. With pride and shame, people are protective of their time, their rights, their reputation. But with brokenness, people tend to be self-denying. Pride and shame cause this desire to be served, while with brokenness, there's this motivation to actually serve others. Pride and shame always come with a desire to be successful, while brokenness, you're motivated to be faithful and to make others a success. It's just not all about you. With pride and shame, there's this desire for self-advancement, to be able to make it all about me, while with brokenness, there's actually a willingness, a desire to promote other people. Pride and shame brings about this drive to be recognized and appreciated. But if you think about it, brokenness, there's this sense of your own unworthiness, and you're just thrilled that God could use you at all. With pride and shame, you're easily wounded by others when they're promoted and you're overlooked. But when there's brokenness, there's an eagerness for others to get credit and to rejoice when others are actually promoted or lifted up. With pride and shame, you have this subconscious feeling that people are lucky to have me and my gifts, just they're fortunate to be with me. While with brokenness, there's a hard attitude that says, I'm fortunate to be with other people. And you know that you have nothing to offer except maybe God's grace flowing through you toward them. With pride and shame, there's this confidence of how much you know. But when there's brokenness, there's a humility and an understanding of how much you've yet to learn. With pride and shame, you're quick to blame other people. But when there's brokenness, you can see where you're wrong in a given situation. When there's pride and shame, we tend to be unapproachable or defensive when criticized. But when you're broken, you can receive criticism with a humble spirit. With pride and shame, we're concerned with being respectable. What are others going to think? We work to protect our image and our reputation. But with brokenness, the concern is with being real. What matters isn't what others think, but really what's true. With brokenness, there's this willingness to die to your own reputation. That's not what's important because others are important. With pride and shame, it's difficult to share your needfulness with other people, or maybe your neediness. We want to keep that image up. But with brokenness, there's a willingness to be open and transparent with others as God directs. With pride and shame, we really want to be sure that no one finds out when we failed, right? We have this instinct to cover things up because, again, that image is all important. But once broken, we don't care who knows what. We're willing to be exposed because there's really nothing to lose, nothing to protect. When there's pride and shame, you have a hard time saying, I was wrong. Will you please forgive me? But when someone's broken, they're quick to admit failure and seek forgiveness when necessary. With pride and shame, there's this tendency to deal in generalities when confessing your failings or, your defects of character. But when there's brokenness, people are really quick to acknowledge specifics when dealing with their failures. When there's pride and shame, we're really concerned about the consequences, what's going to happen to me as a result of missing the mark, not getting it right. But when there's brokenness, really you're just grieved over what you've done and you seek the root cause of what's causing that. It's just taking personal responsibility and owning it. With pride and shame, we may be remorseful over our failure and sorry we got caught and found out. But when I think there's brokenness, it's not so much that. There's just genuine repentance over the fact that, I screwed up, as evidenced by the fact that I want to never do that again. Like one of the things I believe when I see people who are truly broken, they never want to be that other person again. They want to move forward. When there's pride and shame, you wait for others to come to you to ask forgiveness when there is a conflict or a misunderstanding in relationship. But if brokenness is in place, that person actually takes the initiative to be reconciled when there's a misunderstanding or a conflict in relationship. With pride and shame, there's a tendency to compare yourself with others and feel worthy of honor because you always see the flaws in them and the good stuff in you. But when there's brokenness, you compare yourself against a higher power and you feel a desperate need for mercy. With pride and shame, you're blind to your own true heart condition. But with brokenness, you're willing to walk in the light and expose your heart. When there's pride and shame, you don't think there's anything that you need to take personal responsibility for because you're never wrong. Or if you are wrong, you're certainly going to hide that. But with brokenness, you realize that you really have a need for a continual heart attitude of repentance, of just recognizing, doing my own personal inventories. It talks about the 12th step or the 10th step, and that, I've got my defects of character I've got to be looking for. When there's pride and shame, you really don't see a need to change, but you're pretty sure everybody else does. But when there's brokenness, there's this continual sense of a need for an attitude of brokenness. And you seek, to become who you were actually made to be. You seek that true self out. As you listen to that list, I hope you kind of check off, where do you land in this thing? Are you more toward the pride and shame side, or are you more toward the brokenness side? It's something really worth considering to healing.